Why has Cuba become suddenly so important for the United States of America? 90 miles. That's all that separates the United States from Cuba. For more than 60 years, this small stretch of water has been a place of tension, a symbol of Cold War conflict and an ongoing challenge to American power. But today, the situation has become more dangerous than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why is this island, poor and struggling after many years of sanctions, now the focus of the Trump administration? Why are warnings about a possible attack increasing day after day? To understand what is happening now, we need to look at the past. For much of the 20th century, the United States treated Cuba as a dependent country. American companies controlled major industries like sugar, mining, and electricity, and the US government often influenced who ruled the island. This changed in 1959 with the Cuban Revolution. Fidel Castro formed an alliance with the Soviet Union. In response, the United States imposed a full economic embargo, carried out secret operations like the Bay of Pigs invasion, and followed a policy of isolating Cuba that has lasted for more than 60 years. Now, Professor Joseph J. Gonzalez of Appalachian State University says, for the first time since 1959, an American president appears on the verge of depose a Cuban president and compel the Cuban government to align itself with the American strategic interests. The turning point came in the early 2026 when the Trump administration captured Venezuela's President Maduro. For many years, Cuba received up to 55,000 barrels of cheap oil every day from Venezuela in exchange for sending doctors and security workers. That support suddenly stopped. After that, Trump placed tariffs on any country that tries to send oil to Cuba, creating a direct energy blockade, not just continuing the old embargo. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has clearly stated that the goal is regime change. Dr. William Luna Grandi of American University adds, the administration is using economic pressure as a weapon to force capitulation, not as a tool to promote change. As a result, Cuba is facing serious humanitarian crisis. The country is going through its worst situation since the fall of the Soviet Union. Power cuts happen across the country, food supplies are extremely limited, and medicines are hard to find. Six-time Grammy-winning Cuban-American musician Arturo Farrell calls it a monster act of cruelty. He says, it is literally starving 10 million Cubans. The richest nation in the world is watching human beings suffer and die 90 miles south of Key West. The Trump administration's new national security plan aims to turn the Western Hemisphere into what experts call a hegemonic fortress. Cuba is seen as the last major country standing in the way, a geopolitical nail that needs to be moved. The fact that Cuba has survived for 60 years despite US pressure is seen as a signal to rivals like Russia and China. Professor Jorge Duany of Florida International University explains, for many in the Cuban exile community, the revolution represents an unfinished Cold War, a personal loss that demands rectification. There is also an important internal factor, politics in Florida. The Cuban-American community there is large and very active in politics. Many Republican leaders have taken a tough position on Cuba to gain their support. Congress Carlos Jimenez said, President Trump is committed to be the cause of freedom for Cuba. First, it was Venezuela. Now he is going for the land that saw me born. However, not all Cuban Americans agree. Carlos Lazo, leader of the Bridges of Love movement, says, sanctions don't hurt the government, they hurt families. My own relatives in Cuba suffer because of these policies. Even with strong public statements, the US government is secretly talking with Cuban leaders. If the situation gets worse, it could lead to a major migration crisis, with thousands of people trying to reach the United States by crossing the Florida Straits. So what does the US actually want? Reports suggest something called a Venezuela solution. President Diaz-Canel steps down, strict leaders from the Castro era are removed from power, Cuba opens its economy to American, and especially Cuban-American investment. In return, the US would reduce the oil blockade and allow the Castro family to stay in the country. Professor Ted Henkin of CUNY notes, it is the Castro family that controls and directs negotiations with the United States. Professor Gonzalez concludes that if the deal goes through, Cuba looks to become something less than a sovereign nation and more akin to an American client state. The Cuban government has clearly rejected these ideas. President Diaz-Canel said, "Neither the president nor the nation of any leader in Cuba is up for negotiation with the United States." In a strong show of resistance, Cuba's most famous living musician, Salvio Rodriguez, was given a weapon by the government and said he would fight to defend the revolution. Maria Jose Espinosa, director of the Center for Engagement and Advocacy in the America, says the Cuban system is still strong. The state apparatus, the Communist Party, and the security forces in the military economic system is not on the verge of collapse. The United States is now at a critical moment. The administration's policy of maximum pressure could force Cuba to give in, ending the revolution that began in 1959. But if talks fail, it could lead to the country collapsing, causing mass migration and instability in the region. Dr. William Leo Grande Juarez, history shows that coercive pressure alone rarely produces the outcome policymakers intend. The Cuban people have repeatedly shown they will endure tremendous hardships to preserve their sovereignty. For now, 11 million Cubans are waiting. Electricity is often unavailable, the economy is severely damaged, and the 90-mile distance between the two countries has never felt so small or so dangerous. Arturo O'Farrell puts it simply, "The richest nation in the world is watching human beings suffer and die 90 miles away of them."